She was born with a mind powerful enough to remember everything, but into a world determined to forget her. In 1865, as America spoke loudly of freedom, a black girl named Sarah Brown entered a life where brilliance offered no protection, and intelligence came without opportunity. Her gift was extraordinary, yet her circumstances were cruelly ordinary, marked by poverty, prejudice, and silence. This is the story of a genius the world refused to see, a story of knowledge used not for fame, but for survival, of a young girl whose photographic memory became her quiet rebellion against a society that denied her education, praise, and possibility. Sarah Brown's life asks a haunting question: what happens when brilliance is born where hope is scarce? And it leaves us with a truth we cannot ignore, that greatness often exists in the hardest lives, even when history never writes the name down. Born in 1865, the very year the Civil War ended, Sarah Brown entered a world that promised freedom in words but delivered hardship in reality. Slavery had been abolished, yet for black families, especially black girls, the chains merely changed form. Poverty, discrimination, and silence followed them everywhere. In this harsh and unforgiving world, Sarah carried something rare and extraordinary, a photographic memory. It was a gift so powerful that it could have changed her life completely. Yet the world she lived in was determined to overlook it. From an early age, Sarah noticed that her mind worked differently. She remembered everything. A page read once stayed with her forever. Conversations echoed in her head word for word. Faces, places, and moments fixed themselves in her memory like photographs that never faded. While other children struggled to recall lessons, Sarah could repeat them effortlessly. She didn't know the name for her ability. No one around her did, but she knew it made her different. However, being different in 1865 was dangerous, especially for a black girl. Sarah was born into a family that worked long hours simply to survive. Education was considered a luxury, not a right. Schools for black children were rare, underfunded, and often hostile environments. Many believed teaching black children too much knowledge was pointless, or even threatening. Sarah's brilliance did not inspire admiration. Instead, it was met with indifference or suspicion. Yet whenever she found access to learning, even briefly, her gift revealed itself. If she overheard a lesson meant for someone else, she remembered it. If she saw a newspaper discarded on the street, she absorbed every word. If someone read aloud nearby, Sarah stored the information as if her mind were a locked library. Protecting knowledge, the world tried to deny her. Learning became an act of quiet rebellion. Knowledge became her shelter. Emotionally, Sarah lived in constant tension. On one hand, she felt wonder and excitement at what her mind could do. On the other, she felt deep loneliness. There was no one to guide her, no teacher to nurture her ability, no system willing to invest in her future. She watched others with less talent move ahead simply because society allowed them to. This awareness brought frustration and sadness, emotions far too heavy for a child to carry alone. As Sarah grew older, the weight of reality pressed harder. Work consumed her days. Survival left little room for dreams. Her memory helped her excel at tasks, remembering instructions perfectly, learning skills faster than others. But excellence did not bring escape. She became valuable for labor, not celebrated for intelligence. Her gift, instead of opening doors, was quietly exploited and then ignored. Still, Sarah never lost her inner world. Inside her mind lived books she would never own, lessons she would never formally study, and histories no one asked her to tell. She remembered stories of her elders, accounts of pain and endurance, moments of kindness that proved humanity still existed. Her memory preserved voices that history threatened to erase. One of the most painful aspects of Sarah's life was not just what she endured, but what she never received: recognition, opportunity, encouragement. In another time, another body, another skin color, she might have been called a genius. She might have become a scholar, a teacher, a writer, or a leader. Instead, her brilliance remained largely invisible. And yet, her life was not meaningless. Sarah's story teaches a powerful lesson. Talent alone is not enough. Opportunity determines whether brilliance shines or fades. Her life exposes how many gifted minds were lost, not because they lacked ability, but because society refused to see them. It reminds us that intelligence exists everywhere, even in places the world chooses not to look. There is also a lesson in resilience. Despite everything, Sarah never stopped observing, learning, and remembering. Her mind remained free even when her circumstances were not. That quiet strength, the refusal to let the world erase her inner light, is its own form of victory. Emotionally, her story leaves us with a mix of admiration and sorrow. Admiration for her strength and gift, sorrow for the life she could have lived, but it also leaves us with responsibility to notice, to nurture, to ensure that brilliance is not dismissed because of background, gender, or color. Sarah Brown may not appear in history books. There may be no records of her achievements, no statues, no written legacy, but her story represents countless unheard voices, especially black girls whose intelligence was buried under injustice. Remembering her is an act of recognition long overdue. In a harsh world that tried to overlook her, Sarah Brown existed as proof that greatness does not need permission to exist. Sometimes it only needs someone willing to remember, and finally, to listen. Sarah Brown's mind was extraordinary, but her world was not built to recognize or reward it. Born just after slavery's end, she stepped into a society still tightly bound by racial hierarchy, economic struggle, and deeply rooted prejudice. Freedom existed on paper, yet for Sarah and millions like her, daily life remained a battle against forces designed to keep them unseen. Her genius did not protect her from hardship. Instead, it existed quietly beneath it, like a bright flame forced to burn behind thick walls. From childhood, poverty defined Sarah's days. Her family worked tirelessly, often from dawn to dusk, simply to secure food and shelter. There was no safety net, no room for error, and no time for dreams. Education, when it existed at all, was irregular and fragile. Schools for black children were overcrowded, poorly supplied, and constantly threatened with closure. Teachers were underpaid and overwhelmed, and many students were pulled out early to help their families survive. Sarah's extraordinary memory could absorb lessons instantly, but opportunity rarely stayed long enough for her to use it. Racism shaped not only what Sarah could access, but how she was perceived. Intelligence in a black girl challenged the beliefs of the era. Curiosity was discouraged. Asking questions was often punished. Excellence was met with silence or suspicion. When Sarah demonstrated her sharp memory, reciting passages she had read once or recalling instructions perfectly, adults rarely responded with encouragement. Instead, they redirected her back to work, reminding her of her place. Over time, she learned that showing brilliance could be risky, even unwelcome. Emotionally, this created a deep and lasting conflict within her. Inside, Sarah felt the thrill of understanding, the joy of connecting ideas, the satisfaction of knowing she was capable of more. Outside, she encountered constant reminders that capability did not equal permission. This gap between who she was and what she was allowed to be bred frustration, confusion, and quiet pain. She watched doors open for others that were firmly shut to her, not because she lacked talent, but because she lacked the right identity. Limited opportunities narrowed Sarah's path as she grew older. Work replaced schooling. Survival replaced ambition. Her mind helped her learn skills quickly and perform tasks with precision, making her valuable as labor, but never as a thinker. Employers relied on her reliability while ignoring her intelligence. In this way, her gift was used but never honored. She became known for competence, not brilliance, for obedience, not insight. Yet even under these constraints, Sarah's genius refused to disappear. Her memory preserved knowledge the world denied her. She carried lessons learned in fragments, overheard conversations, borrowed books, scraps of newspapers. She remembered stories told by elders, histories passed down orally, warnings, wisdom, and hope. While society attempted to erase Black achievement, Sarah's mind became an archive safeguarding truths that would otherwise be lost. This inner preservation was both a comfort and a burden. Comfort because it gave her identity and depth, burden because she had few places to share it. Racism also shaped Sarah's sense of self-worth. Repeated dismissal can slowly convince even the most gifted person that their abilities are insignificant. There were moments when Sarah questioned the value of her mind. What good was a powerful memory if it could not change her circumstances? What purpose did intelligence serve in a world unwilling to see it? These doubts weighed heavily, threatening to dim her confidence and silence her curiosity. Still, resilience threaded through her life. Sarah learned to survive emotionally as well as physically. She learned when to speak and when to stay quiet, when to reveal her intelligence and when to protect it. This restraint was not weakness. It was adaptation. In a society hostile to her brilliance, discretion became a form of self-preservation. Her genius, though hidden, remained intact. The lesson of Sarah's life is deeply uncomfortable but profoundly important. Talent does not thrive on talent alone. Genius requires access, support, and belief. Without these, even the brightest minds can be confined to the margins. Sarah's story exposes how systems, not individuals, waste potential. It reminds us that inequality does not just steal comfort, it steals futures. There is also a lesson in dignity. Despite everything, Sarah did not lose her humanity or her inner richness. Her intelligence gave her perspective, empathy, and awareness. Though she could not change her world, she understood it deeply, and that understanding mattered. Her life stands as a quiet challenge to history. How many thinkers, innovators, and leaders were lost because society refused to look beyond prejudice. Emotionally, Sarah's story leaves us with sorrow, but also responsibility. Sorrow for what she endured and what she was denied. Responsibility to recognize brilliance wherever it appears and to dismantle the barriers that still shadow it today. Her life urges us to ask not just who is talented, but who is allowed to succeed. Sarah Brown's genius did not fail her. The world failed her, and remembering that truth is the first step toward ensuring it does not happen again. For Sarah Brown, knowledge was never a luxury. It was never something pursued for praise, titles, or recognition. Knowledge was survival. Born into a world that denied her education, protection, and opportunity, Sarah learned early that the only thing no one could take from her was what she carried inside her mind. Her photographic memory, sharp, unyielding, and precise, became her strongest shield in a hostile world. Sarah did not grow up surrounded by books or teachers. She grew up surrounded by work, struggle, and warning. Every day demanded alertness. A mistake could mean punishment, hunger, or loss of what little security her family had. In such an environment, memory mattered. Remembering instructions exactly meant keeping a job. Remembering faces and tones meant knowing who was safe and who was not. Remembering past mistakes, hers and others, meant learning how to avoid harm. Her mind was always working, always storing, always protecting her future. Learning came to Sarah in fragments. A lesson overheard through a doorway, a newspaper abandoned after one read, a sentence spoken by someone who didn't realize she was listening. Where others might forget these moments, Sarah absorbed them completely. Words fixed themselves in her mind, facts connected naturally, ideas grew quietly without permission. Though denied formal schooling for long stretches of her life, she educated herself piece by piece, turning scraps of information into a private education. Emotionally, this process was both empowering and isolating. There was pride in knowing she understood more than she was allowed to show. There was comfort in the certainty of her memory, proof that she was capable, intelligent, and whole. But there was also loneliness. Knowledge is meant to be shared, discussed, challenged. Sarah rarely had that chance. She learned to keep much of what she knew to herself, hiding her brilliance to avoid suspicion or dismissal. Silence became part of her survival strategy. Her memory also helped her endure hardship. When days were long and labor was exhausting, Sarah's mind became a refuge. She replayed stories she had heard, lessons she remembered, moments of kindness she had witnessed. Memory allowed her to escape without leaving, to find mental space in a life that offered little physical freedom. In this way, knowledge was not just practical. It was emotional shelter. Quiet resistance defined Sarah's life. She did not protest loudly. She did not lead movements or stand on stages. Resistance, for her, was internal and steady. Every fact she remembered challenged a system that wanted her ignorant. Every skill she mastered defied expectations placed upon her. Every truth she preserved pushed back against a world determined to erase black voices and black intelligence. By remembering, she resisted forgetting, and forgetting was exactly what oppression depended on. There were moments when her knowledge made a real difference. She could anticipate problems before others saw them. She could adapt quickly, learning new tasks faster than anyone expected. These abilities helped her survive where others struggled. Yet even then, recognition rarely followed. Her competence was useful, but her intelligence was inconvenient. Society took what it needed from her mind without honoring its depth. Emotionally, this created a quiet ache. Sarah understood that knowledge alone could not free her. She knew more than many, yet remained confined by the same barriers. This awareness brought frustration, but it also brought clarity. She saw the system for what it was, not a reflection of worth, but of power. That understanding protected her from internalizing the lies around her. She did not believe she was inferior. She knew she was restricted. One of the most powerful lessons in Sarah's story is that resistance does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like remembering names that history once erased. Sometimes it looks like carrying truth forward when there is no audience. Sometimes it looks like refusing to let your mind shrink to fit the space you are given. Sarah's resistance was patient, disciplined, and deeply human. Her life also teaches us that education is not just about classrooms. Learning happens wherever curiosity survives. Sarah's mind proves that intelligence adapts, that it finds cracks even in the hardest walls. But her story also reminds us of the tragedy of wasted potential. How much more could she have done if knowledge had been supported instead of suppressed? Emotionally, her journey leaves us with admiration and sadness intertwined. Admiration for her strength, ingenuity, and quiet courage. Sadness for the limits placed on her life. Yet there is also hope. Hope rooted in the fact that her mind remained her own. Despite everything, Sarah was never empty, never erased, never broken. In the end, Sarah Brown's greatest act of survival was this: she remembered. She remembered what she learned, what she witnessed, who she was. And in doing so, she carried forward a truth that still matters today: that knowledge, even when hidden, is powerful, and that remembering itself can be an act of resistance. Sarah Brown lived in an age that had little language for celebrating a black girl's intelligence, and even less will to do so. Born in the aftermath of slavery, she grew up at a moment when freedom was proclaimed, but equality was carefully withheld. Schools, institutions, and public praise were not designed with her in mind. In that world, brilliance did not disappear. It simply went unrecognized. Sarah's life became a quiet testimony to how extraordinary talent can exist in plain sight and still be ignored. From her earliest years, signs of Sarah's exceptional mind were unmistakable. She remembered words after hearing them once. She absorbed lessons without repetition. She connected ideas intuitively, seeing patterns others missed. But these moments of brilliance rarely met encouragement. Adults were focused on survival, not cultivation. Teachers, when present at all, were overwhelmed and constrained by low expectations imposed by society. Talent without recognition is fragile, and Sarah's was left to stand alone. The denial of education was not accidental, it was systemic. Schools for black children were underfunded, sporadic, and often temporary. Attendance depended on weather, work demands, and local hostility. Girls were especially vulnerable to being pulled out early, expected to labor rather than learn. For Sarah, this meant that her intellectual growth happened in fits and starts. Each interruption felt like a door closing just as she reached for it. The world seemed to say, again and again, "This is not for you." Emotionally, this constant dismissal shaped Sarah's inner life. She felt the spark of pride when she understood something quickly, when knowledge clicked into place. But that pride was followed by confusion and hurt when no one noticed, or worse, when noticing brought discomfort. Praise was rare, curiosity was discouraged. Over time, Sarah learned that showing intelligence could invite skepticism or reprimand. She learned to dim her light, not because it faded, but because shining felt unsafe. As she grew older, the pattern repeated. Work replaced study, responsibility replaced curiosity. Her mind remained sharp, but there was no stage on which it could be seen. Employers valued her reliability and memory, yet never her insight. Her intelligence made her useful, not respected. This kind of unrecognized brilliance is particularly painful because it is exploited without being honored. Sarah gave the world the benefits of her mind while receiving none of its rewards. Racism compounded this invisibility. Society was more comfortable denying Sarah's talent than confronting it. Acknowledging her brilliance would have challenged deeply held beliefs about race and gender. It was easier to overlook her than to rethink the system, and so her achievements, small victories of understanding, problem-solving, and mastery, went unrecorded. History passed her by, not because she lacked substance, but because it lacked vision. The emotional toll of this erasure was heavy. There were moments of doubt when Sarah wondered whether her abilities mattered at all. Without mirrors to reflect her worth, it was difficult to hold on to confidence. Yet she did not internalize the lie of inferiority. Somewhere deep inside, she knew the truth. The absence of recognition is not the absence of value. This quiet self-knowledge became a source of strength. One of the most tragic aspects of Sarah's story is not simply that she was overlooked, but that the world lost what she might have given. Unrecognized brilliance is a loss not just to the individual, but to society. Ideas never shared, innovations never attempted, wisdom never recorded. Sarah's life invites us to mourn not only her suffering, but the collective cost of exclusion. And yet, there is resilience in her story. Despite never being praised, Sarah continued to learn. Despite never being rewarded, she continued to think deeply. She carried her intelligence with dignity, even when it brought no external validation. This persistence is itself a form of quiet courage. To remain brilliant in a world that refuses to see you requires strength. The lesson here is both timeless and urgent. Recognition matters. Education matters. Praise, when earned, matters. When societies deny these to certain groups, they do not create equality by silence. They create loss. Sarah's story challenges us to look again at who we celebrate, who we invest in, and who we ignore. It urges us to widen our understanding of genius beyond the narrow frames of privilege. Emotionally, Sarah's life leaves us with a mix of sorrow and resolve. Sorrow for the praise she never received, the opportunities she never touched. Resolve to ensure that brilliance is not dismissed because of race, gender, or circumstance. Her story asks us to listen more closely, to notice what we have been trained to overlook. Sarah Brown may never have been applauded in her lifetime, but her unrecognized brilliance still speaks. It reminds us that intelligence does not need permission to exist, and that our responsibility is not just to admire genius when it is convenient, but to recognize it wherever it lives. Sarah Brown's life did not unfold in triumphs recorded by history books or achievements celebrated by crowds. There were no degrees awarded, no titles bestowed, no public recognition of her extraordinary mind, and yet her legacy is profound. It lives not in monuments, but in meaning. Sarah's story reveals a truth that is both painful and necessary. Brilliance can exist in the hardest lives, even when the world refuses to nurture it. Her legacy is one of strength, endurance, and an intelligence that survived despite being denied its chance to flourish. Born in 1865, Sarah entered a nation rebuilding itself while excluding people like her from its promises. Freedom had been declared, but opportunity had not. From the beginning, her life was shaped by labor and limitation. Survival came first. Education came rarely, if at all. Yet within these narrow confines, Sarah carried a mind capable of extraordinary depth. Her photographic memory allowed her to retain everything she encountered, words, ideas, experiences, turning her inner world into a vast living record. The tragedy of Sarah's life is not that she lacked talent, but that her talent had nowhere to go. As a child, she showed unmistakable signs of brilliance. She learned faster than others. She remembered effortlessly. She understood deeply, but each moment of promise was followed by interruption. Work that pulled her away, schools that closed, adults who discouraged curiosity. Over time, these interruptions became a pattern. Potential was sparked, then smothered, again and again. Emotionally, this created a quiet sorrow that followed Sarah through her life. She sensed what she might have become. She felt the reach of her own mind. And she felt, just as clearly, the barriers that would never move for her. This awareness was painful, not dramatic, but constant. It lived in unanswered questions, in paths not taken, in futures imagined and then set aside. Yet Sarah did not collapse under this weight. Instead, she developed a different kind of strength, a strength rooted in endurance, a strength that allowed her to continue learning even when learning brought no reward. She carried knowledge for its own sake. She preserved stories, lessons, and truths simply because they mattered. Her mind became an act of resistance against erasure, a refusal to let hardship define the limits of her inner life. This is where Sarah's legacy begins to take shape. Though the world wasted her potential, it did not destroy her brilliance. She lived as proof that intelligence does not disappear when it is ignored. It waits, it adapts, it survives. Sarah's life challenges the belief that success is the only measure of worth. She may not have risen in status, but she rose in understanding. She may not have changed the system, but she saw it clearly, and that clarity mattered. The pain of wasted potential is one of the deepest sorrows in human experience. It is not loud or sudden, it is slow and aching. Sarah lived with this pain quietly. There were no speeches to express it, no platforms to transform it into change. And yet she carried it with dignity. She did not become bitter. She did not surrender her curiosity. She continued to observe, to remember, to think. Her emotional life was complex. There was sadness, yes, but also pride. Pride in her mind, pride in her resilience, pride in knowing who she was, even when no one else acknowledged it. This inner self-respect was hard, won and deeply meaningful. In a world that denied her value, she refused to deny herself. Sarah's story teaches us that legacy is not always about what a person achieves, but about what they preserve. She preserved knowledge. She preserved memory. She preserved the truth that brilliance is not owned by privilege. It appears everywhere, sometimes in places least supported, least expected, least remembered. Her life also forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How many Sarah Browns were there? How many gifted minds were lost not to lack of ability, but to lack of access? How many innovations, ideas, and insights never reached the world because society decided who was worthy of being educated and celebrated? These questions are not only historical, they are moral. The lesson of Sarah's legacy is not just to feel sorrow, but to feel responsibility. Responsibility to recognize talent early, to nurture it intentionally, to remove barriers that still prevent brilliance from being seen. Her story reminds us that when we fail to do this, the loss is shared. Society is poorer for every mind it ignores, and yet there is hope woven into her legacy. Sarah proves that even in the harshest conditions, the human mind can remain rich. That dignity does not require applause. That intelligence does not need permission to exist. Her life affirms the quiet heroism of endurance, the courage to remain thoughtful in a world that discourages thought, to remain curious in a world that demands silence. She may not have left behind written works or public accomplishments, but she left behind something just as powerful, a story that challenges how we define success and greatness. Her legacy asks us to honor not only those who were celebrated, but those who were overlooked, not only those who achieved, but those who endured with brilliance intact. In the end, Sarah Brown's life tells us this: wasted potential is a tragedy, but surviving with one's mind and humanity intact is a triumph of its own. Her strength was not in what she was allowed to become, but in what she refused to lose. That is her legacy. Sarah Brown's life did not end with applause, recognition, or the fulfillment her brilliance deserved. It ended quietly, much like it was lived, rich in intelligence, poor in opportunity. Born in 1865 with a photographic memory, she moved through a world shaped by poverty, racism, and rigid limits placed on black girls. Education brushed past her but never stayed. Praise existed but never reached her, yet her mind never dimmed. Through hardship, Sarah turned knowledge into survival. She learned from fragments, remembered what others discarded, and carried entire worlds inside her when the outside world offered little space. Her brilliance remained largely unseen, but it was never lost. It lived in her endurance, in her clarity, and in her refusal to believe the lie that she was less than what she knew herself to be. The pain of her story lies in wasted potential, in everything she could have become if the world had chosen to see her. But the power of her story lies in something deeper. Sarah proves that intelligence does not depend on permission, that dignity can survive neglect, and that strength is sometimes quiet, patient, and unseen. Her life exposes not her failure, but society's. In remembering Sarah Brown, we are reminded of countless minds history overlooked and futures it never allowed to bloom. Her story challenges us to look more closely, to listen more carefully, and to protect brilliance wherever it appears. Because even when the world refuses to nurture it, greatness still exists, waiting to be recognized, valued, and finally allowed to rise.